Hello, welcome to the 28th season of the John E. Marlow Guitar Series. My name is Candace Mowbray, and I coordinate the pre-concert talks for the series. I'm very pleased to introduce Michael Newman as our guest speaker for what is sure to be an extraordinary performance by CELIL REFIK. Michael Newman and Laura Altman gave a wonderful performance for the Marlow series last season, and their post-concert Q&A was so engaging and delightful that I hoped one or both members of the duo might come back this season to be a guest speaker. Michael Newman graciously obliged and has provided us with a very special presentation filmed around New York City. It will both entertain and educate us, and we are very appreciative to Michael for agreeing to do this. I'd like to share a few notes about Michael Newman before the presentation begins. Michael Newman gained international recognition during the 1970s as one of the outstanding concert guitarists of his generation. He has been a soloist with the Atlanta, Seattle, and Honolulu symphonies, given chamber music concerts with renowned artists such as the Turtle Island String Quartet, and been featured in international media such as The Larry King Show, The New York Times, and Guitar Player magazine. He and guitarist Laura Altman are celebrating their 42nd anniversary season. They have 12 critically acclaimed CDs, and their tours have taken them to world cultural capitals and premier venues across 5 continents and to 49 of the United States. They have built a unique repertoire of works composed for the duo, and they gave the world premiere of The Book of Imaginary Beings by Leo Brouwer to celebrate Brouwer's 80th birthday in 2019. They received a new duet from Brouwer for the 2021 video tribute Remembering Julian Breen, and will record the duet in 2022. Newman and Altman are founding directors of the New York Guitar Seminar at Mannes, now in its 22nd year, the Raritan River Music Festival, and the Lanciano International Guitar Seminar. They have been ensemble in residence at Mannes School of Music since 1987. Michael has served on their guitar and chamber music faculty since 1979, and now also teaches at the College of New Jersey and New Jersey City University.
Greetings and welcome to the Marlow series and the concert for CELIL REFIK. I'm Michael Newman of the Newman and Altman Guitar Duo, and I'll be speaking with you today a little bit about the music, a little bit about CELIL's history in New York City. I'm standing in front of the building on the Upper West Side of Manhattan that had been Mannes School of Music when CELIL came here 10 years ago to pursue his Master of Music degree. Laura and I were at the Guitar Symposium in Iserlohn, Germany, and while we were there, we met Tolga Çollu, who is a Turkish guitarist, composer, really an eminent figure in the world of microtonal music. And he told us about his duo partner who had a student, a young man, a kid, CELIL REFIK, whose father is an eminent musicologist in Turkey, was already performing since the age of 6, and had been winning competitions in Europe. Tolga thought that New York would be the right place for CELIL. I did not disagree. Fast forward a number of years, Tolga came to New York, to the New York Guitar Seminar at Mannes, right behind us here, that Laura and I had founded and have directed since the year 2000. And shortly after that, in the fall of 2011, Jalil started his Master of Music training at Mannes in a rather auspicious class of wonderful young players. Jalil definitely knew his way around the guitar, even then when he started his master's degree at the age of 19. And as you all know, he's been taking the musical world by storm ever since. On his first concert in North America, which was in the Mannes Concert Hall, Jalil played music by Jorge Morel. And he told me that Morel was his favorite composer. He loved Morel's music, he loved Morel's playing. So I thought, let's invite Jalil to meet Jorge Morel. So Laura and I had known Jorge for almost half a century. Arrangements were made. Tony Acosta from Luthier Music brought us along, and at the gathering at Morel's apartment in Queens were luminaries of the guitar world, including Juan de la Mata, the esteemed flamenco artist, who by then was already into his 90s. And Morel, as always, was very welcoming. Here was this young man, had just arrived from Turkey, and we exchanged pleasantries and some food and some wine. And then he asked Jalil to play something. And at that point, the magic was there. Jorge fell in love with the interpretations that Jalil was doing of his music, and a great friendship was formed that lasted until Morel's recent passing. This past summer, the New York Guitar Seminar at Mannes did an online tribute to Morel because we could not yet be in person for events. And at that tribute, Jalil spoke eloquently about his relationship with Maestro Morel and played the sonatina that he'll be performing on the Marlow concert that you will now hear.
No. 2, 3, no. And the 4. 1, 2, 3. Right? Mm-hmm. Let it ring. And now you go. Okay. Right away you do that. And then when you speed out.
It's a time-honored tradition for musicians and composers to move around from one town to another, one country to another, and absorb the new cultures that they find. Many of the pieces on Jalil's concert are written by composers who've come to new lands. The first piece on the concert is the introduction and Rondo number 2 by Dionisio Aguado. Aguado was a Spanish guitarist, pedagogue, composer, and he had achieved some renown in Spain, but he left in the year 1825. He moved from Madrid to Paris. Really, two of the biggest hotbeds of culture, of arts in the world were Paris, Vienna at that time, and so many guitarists and composers did end up there. surprisingly enough, Fernando Sor, the other Spaniard who's quite well known at that same period, was in Paris already, and the French composer, guitarist, and career military officer François de Fossa was also in Paris. He had been stationed in Spain, also in Mexico. He knew Aguado, he knew Aguado's method, and he translated Aguado's method into French in 1826, and it was subsequently published in 1827. As many of you know, Sor and Aguado were good friends, and Sor wrote a duet for the two of them to play, Les Deux Amis, the two friends. What you'll notice in this piece as you watch Jalil play is that he has one of the most beautiful right hands in the guitar world. The ease with which he flies through these incredibly demanding passages is truly a wonder to behold. When I was in my formative years, I always looked up to John Williams, Manuel Barrueco, as people who had ultimate control and ultimate ease of playing with the right hand, and Jalil is right up there with them. We think of many 17th and 18th century composers who achieved great success settling in another country. Jean-Baptiste Luli comes to mind as the founder of the opera in Paris at the court of Louis XIV in Versailles. But he started out as Giovanni Battista Luli of Florence, Italy, where, by the way, he studied guitar when he was a kid. Of course, Georg Friedrich Handel came to London, became George Frederick Handel, had wild success with his music there. The piece that Jalil will play is by Jean-Baptiste Laurier, who is a Flemish composer born in Ghent. He studied there, he studied in Paris, and he moved to London as well. He actually got to London in 1705, 7 years before Handel did. And he took the name John Lully of London, and he was the first person who brought the concerti grossi of Corelli to the audiences in London. They became quite popular there. He also helped develop the transverse flute, which supplanted the recorder after many centuries of prominence for the recorder. And he wrote 6 suites of lessons, as he called them, for the harpsichord or spinet. And it's that music that you're going to hear from Jalil. Just as an aside, that music, those lessons for keyboard, became known again in the earlier part of the 20th century because a Russian-born pianist named Leopold Godofsky settled in New York, and he performed and recorded a number of these Laurier lessons. He did a set of gigs from the lessons. Here's a nice little connection that Godofsky's son, Leopold Godofsky Jr., was also a musician, but he was also a scientist. And he worked with a friend of his, another scientist musician named Leopold Mannes, who was the son of David and Clara Mannes, who founded the Mannes School of Music. And the two young Leopolds had met as school children in Riverdale in the Bronx, that borough of New York City. One other interesting connection with the music of that time in London is that another composer settled in London, an Italian named Francesco Gemignani. And Gemignani was a violinist as well as a composer and a teacher. And Gemignani had actually studied with Alessandro Scarlatti, Domenico Scarlatti's father. And he also studied violin with Arcangelo Corelli. So he was part of the Corelli movement in London, and his own compositions were quite popular. In fact, he played his own violin concertos for King George I, with Handel playing the accompaniment on the keyboard. Jalil knows about Gemignani from his Manist days, because in guitar survey class of techniques and literature, we studied Gemignani's wonderful treatise called Good Taste in the Art of Music, that was published in 1749 in London. And it talks about ornamentation, all the different ways to do ornamentation. And it's for violin, but it's applicable in so many ways to so many instruments. And in fact, he talks about an ornament called close shake, where he describes moving the finger slowly on the string and then back the other direction and continuing the motion. And if you do it quickly, it is good for expressing excitement and energy. And if you move it slowly, it can express the more tender passions. And of course, he was talking about vibrato. He was a strong proponent of vibrato and of all these ornaments, and using them to create the expression that would best demonstrate and best communicate what the composer had in mind. So Jalil took part in those discussions and those demonstrations, and perhaps we'll hear some of those ornaments on his Marlow Guitar Series concert. Another young traveling composer was Isaac Albanes. The story has it that when he was 8 years old, his parents were going to ship him off, so they thought, to the conservatory in Madrid for more training. However, he stowed away on a ship that took him to the Caribbean, to South America, and he ended up in the United States, where he worked playing the piano in bars and various establishments to earn enough money to come back to Europe. He wrote incredibly evocative pieces of the character of different regions and different cities in Spain. The Suite Espagnole was originally written in 1886. It was published then with 4 movements: Granada, Sevilla, Catalunya, and Cuba. After Albanes died in 1912, well, he died in 1906, but in 1912, his publisher printed a new Suite Española that had a number of other selections in it, but they were not necessarily pieces that went with the titles that Albanes had left. So, for example, Asturias got in its place the Prelude to Cantos de España as part of this suite. Also Cádiz, Aragon, and Castilla. So for the selections that you'll hear on Jalil's Marlow Guitar Series concert, you'll get Granada, Catalunya, and Sevilla from the original Suite Española, and then Cádiz and Aragon from the revised version. One of the things that Morel truly admired about Jalil was his devotion to composition, that Jalil takes his composition very seriously. He doesn't just noodle around on the guitar. Yeah, this chord sounds good. Now I'll do this one for a while. How about this? Yeah, I'll sit on this chord for a while. mean, he studied composition, and he can write for the piano and chamber ensembles and the guitar. In fact, on December 14th, a student trio at Mannes is going to perform in concert Jalil's trio Upland's Wedding. For this concert, Jalil's playing a piece called Sketches Volume 1, and these are all based on his father's surreal, fantastical drawings. They're really quite lovely. The four that are represented here are Bridge, Bosporus, which is a waterway, otherwise known as the Strait of Istanbul. The next one is Blind Fisherman, and the last one in this set is Blind Fisherman's Wife. By the way, these pieces were dedicated by Jalil to Tom Clippinger, who was a classmate of his from their doctoral studies days at the University of Texas. Now that Jalil is back in the New York area, where he's now heading the guitar program at New Jersey City University, we expect to see him around the city quite a bit more. And in fact, Tom just moved to the New York area as well. He's a founding member of the New York City Guitar Quartet, and that group includes, amongst its members, Phil Goldenberg, another Mannes grad of recent years. Jalil's concert for the Marlow Guitar Series will close with three pieces by Astor Piazzolla, the king of the Nuevo Tango, really throughout the second half of the 20th century. And finishing out our connections in the It's a Small World department, you should be aware that Piazzolla was born in Argentina, but he grew up in the East Village of New York, just a few blocks from where Mannes is now. When Piazzolla was studying in Paris in the 1950s, he had a scholarship to the Paris Conservatory, which he resigned, and instead decided to study with Nadia Boulanger, the famed musician who worked with many of the world's best composers, including Aaron Copeland, when Copeland was a student. While Piazzolla was in Paris, he met a lot of musicians, publishers, and they helped him record two 10-inch long LP records, along with the orchestra, members of the orchestra of the Paris Opera. And I'm pretty sure that Jean-Baptiste Luli was not conducting the Paris Opera at the time. I think he'd been gone for a few hundred years. Anyway, Piazzolla's records included a song that he wrote, a quick rhythmic number called Nonino, and also a piece called Rio Sena. That was a descriptive piece about the Parisian scene along the river Seine. Later in his life, when Piazzolla learned that his father had died as the result of a bicycle accident, Piazzolla became distraught and eventually wrote the piece Adios Nonino in tribute to his father. And he took that rhythmic part of the piece, but added what's one of the most haunting melodies possible. In fact, Piazzolla at the time said, perhaps I was surrounded by angels as I composed this melody. The third piece that will be in this set is called Sita. It was written in 1975, and it was part of a tribute that Piazzolla wrote to his mentor, Aníbal Troilo, and Sita was Troilo's wife. We're standing now in front of the new Mannes on West 13th Street in Greenwich Village. I'd like to take a moment to thank everybody for your support and your participation with the Marlow Guitar Series. And a huge congratulations to everyone who's worked so diligently to make the reopening season so artistically satisfying. Special shout out to the volunteers who work so hard to make these events happen, and also special thanks to Danielle, to João, to Candice, and also for the youth competition for Amy and Myrna and Glenn. Thank you all for supporting these efforts, for helping bring cultural events back into real time, in person. Thank you, and enjoy the show.